Wonderful. Well, how are we all on this fine day? I'll take that as you're doing well. My name is Laura. It is lovely to meet you. If I haven't managed to meet you yet, we are thrilled that you would spend your time with us in the room, online, in a different room. Thank you for joining us. We are coming to land in our latest series, The Games We Play. And we have had some great weeks. We've had the honour game, we've had the comparison game, we've had the guessing game. And if you've missed some of those, I'd really advise that you can go back and watch them again on YouTube. They're amazing. And this week, friends, we're knee-deep in December. Yes, we are. It is the first week of December, and yet also feels like it's nearly Christmas. It's that kind of weird thing. And this week, we are looking at the expectation game. As people have started opening their advent calendars and eating all their chocolates in one go, it feels like expectation and Christmas kind of go hand in hand. So we're going to spend some time looking at the expectation game today. And the interesting thing about this is that Christmas and expectation kind of always have gone hand in hand right from the very beginning. So we're going to crack open today by looking at Luke chapter 2, verses 1 to 7. It says, "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world." This was the first census that took place while Quirinius, I've practiced that, Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph went up from the town of Nazareth to Galilee, to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and who was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available to them. You know, from that very first Christmas, it was a time of expectation, a time where family moved from one place to the other. I don't know whether you caught in those first few sentences, it was a time when the Roman ruler had said, right, you guys need to go back to where you're from. I need to count everyone, so everyone needs to travel home. So this sort of sense of mass traveling back to family, back to roots, back home, as people traveled across their country to be with family in a squashed space. And all that being with family in a squashed space means you get to spend time with the family that you love to be with, and all the rest of your family as well. And the spare chairs come out and the beds come out, and you kind of make the best of it. And this is the first Christmas. This is how it was. And it wasn't just that kind of expectation. For Mary and Joseph, there was like a sense of a major life change. They've got their firstborn child on the way. And so I don't know for how many of us here that maybe there's a sense of major change coming. And there is expectation in that, isn't there? Like, how is this thing going to go? How are we going to cope? What's it going to look like on the other side of this? So there's all this level of expectation. But there was also national expectation as well. You see, the Jewish people had been under the rule of other nations for hundreds of years, kind of oppressed by other nations and ruled over. And 700 years before this first Christmas, 700 years before the birth of Jesus, God spoke to a man called Isaiah and told him this: "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive," spoiler, that's Mary, "and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." And this word Emmanuel means God with us. And so 700 years before the birth of Jesus, there were rumors. And God didn't just speak to Isaiah, he spoke to a number of different people saying, there will come a time when a Messiah is born. God with us. And so the Jewish people were waiting expectantly for this person, this individual who would be God on earth but would bring freedom to a nation. And so there was all kinds of levels of expectation around that. People expected like a politician. They expected a warrior and a fighter. They expected an activist. But no one expected a baby. And expectations are really odd things in some ways. Expectations can be good. You can expect something's going to be amazing. Expectations can be bad, that something is just going to be horrendous. You have expectations of other people. Maybe you have expectations of yourself. Maybe there are expectations that are kind of put upon you from other people. Maybe some expectations are reasonable. maybe some expectations are unreasonable, but also many of us may not even realize we have expectations until they're not actually met. And at Christmas, I feel like this expectation game goes up a level because there's so much pressure and there's such this huge build-up and you're put into spaces with people and things that you would normally avoid at all costs. And all of a sudden, you're there and thinking, how is this going to be? I would like to take this moment to be a voice for the unvoiced so far here at Lifecentral Church during this series. Not enough people have said this, so I want to be very clear. It's not a popular opinion, but it is a correct one. Are you ready? Monopoly is the worst board game. Thank you. I have a feeling that's going to get a better response than the response at the end of my talk. It is the worst. It's silly. It's far too long. The same people always win, and the same people always land on the good squares. I can't do maths, and so I always lose. I have lost every single game of Monopoly I've ever played. The one saving grace of Monopoly for me is that it has a small dog as a counterpiece. And to be honest with you, it's not enough to redeem it. I just think Monopoly is absolutely awful. And part of the problem with it for me is that you're supposed to like it. You're supposed to really enjoy the time together. Whereas I don't. I just sit there angry the whole time. I really don't like Monopoly. I was expecting when you play, because it's got such a great reputation, this amazing experience, but the reality is that my expectation and my experience did not match. And when your expectation and your experience doesn't match, you have a gap. And so you fill the gap. Now, some of you will have heard me talk about this idea of filling the gap before, but I think particularly when it's around expectation and experience, filling the gap is an interesting thing because we don't normally fill it positively. Maybe we fill it with anger or with frustration or with blame or disappointment, maybe even self-pity. I've definitely sat feeling very sorry for myself playing Monopoly before. But when we have a sense of expectation on something and we have an experience of something and it does not match up, the middle area is really, really difficult. And I find what I often will try and do is this middle space is not a comfortable one. And so we do everything that we can to try and close that gap, close the gap between our experience and our expectation, to the point that we can do things that we wouldn't normally do to close the gap. Let me give you an example. You might, for example, try and control the experience so that it matches your expectation. In Monopoly, for example, I began by just not telling people when I landed on their squares. That was the start of it. It's a gateway. I then, when people weren't looking, I would steal money from other players. That was another way. One time, I just took loads of money from the bank. I was completely shameless about it. They went to make a cup of tea. I was like, right, this is my moment. Took loads. I still lost. It didn't matter what I did to try and control my experience. I still lost. And it was a sad time for me. It was difficult. But what I've realized as I've got older is this, that often I cannot control my outcomes or the experiences that I have, but I can manage my own expectations. And I don't say this lightly. It's not an easy thing to do. But sometimes when our expectations and our experiences don't match, we can say, you know what, I get to position myself in this. I get to position myself in the gap between my expectations and what's going on. You know, what I've found is that in Monopoly, particularly, the way I've chosen to position myself is out of the game. I have successfully avoided playing Monopoly now for about 20 years, and I love it. And the expectation might be to play, but I know that I'm not going to enjoy that experience. And so I'm like, you know what, I'll actually sit and read over here. I'm going to choose to opt out of that expectation. You guys crack on, have a great time. I'm over here. And I do wonder whether there are elements of life that we can do that with, particularly when there are expectations that have actually been placed on us. For example, at Christmas, there is so much expectation to spend loads of money and buy loads of people presents. But the reality is, for some of us, possibly many of us, if we do that, then we know that our experience in January, February is that we're not going to have any money. Or maybe the debt that you have will increase. because you've been willing to meet the expectation that has been put on you. And it's okay to say this year, I'm not going to play. I don't want that to be my experience, so this year I'm going to opt out. Maybe the expectation is around family, and that you will have a family who is beautifully behaved. And as your in-laws and your extended family come in and see how wonderful your family are, or maybe there's expectation placed on you from other people in your family that you should be with somebody and you're single, and that's difficult. And there's all these expectations that are placed on us externally, and we go, do you know what? That's not my experience right now. And so I'm going to opt out. I'm not going to play. I'm not going to be able to meet your expectations this year, and that's okay. I'm all right with that. Maybe the expectation is that you will be the person that holds everything together. You're the person that makes sure that everyone's okay, everyone's happy, and you're kind of running around between people, kind of simmering relational awkwardness. Oh man, but maybe you're tired of that experience. And maybe this year you go, do you know what? I'm not going to play. This year, you guys can be responsible for your own emotions and your own relationships. I'm going to sit this one out. But I also understand that we can't always do that. Because sometimes the expectations aren't other people's, the expectations are ours. So what happens when you can't drop out because it's actually your expectations? Well, at that point, I would say do the opposite. When it's your expectations that aren't being met, I would advise lean in. Now, the reason I say that, and it may sound a strange thing to say, is that we need to realize this, that my expectations are as much about me as they are about you not meeting them. You see, so often, actually, our own expectations in a situation are about our needs, are about needs that we have. And do you know what? They're not always bad needs. They're often not bad needs, but the problem is those needs aren't being met by that person. So, for example, maybe our need is to feel supported rather than criticized. Or perhaps our need is to feel respected rather than looked down on or talked about. Maybe our need is to feel appreciated rather than taken for granted. And now they are not bad needs, but we need to recognize that when somebody doesn't meet that need, it isn't all about them. And so we get to a point where we say, well, I expect you to because I need. I expect you to be emotional and empathetic and understanding because actually I need to know that somebody cares about my feelings. And so when our expectations of others aren't met, sometimes what we need to think about is what is the need in me here? Now, I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I'm going to be very vulnerable. I'm making this a safe space. And I'm trusting you guys with a big vulnerability for me. So I just need you to hold this in your hands and know that this is a real thing. I have a trigger, right? An absolute trigger. And when this happens, I go from like 0 to 100 in a moment. And that is, I can't stand not being listened to, which is ironic, like doing this. But like, I have an absolute trigger. Like, if I think someone's not listening to me, something inside of me is like, "Argh!" And a lot of my close friends and family know this. You would imagine that most of them are supportive. There is one friend in particular, actually, who likes to play a game of deliberately not listening to me to watch how angry I get. You know who you are. You're in the room. And this friend is wonderful. But when I feel like that, what I tend to do, I find solace in social media, in TikTok and Insta. And that same person actually sent me this week. Forgive me if you've not seen The Sixth Sense. I'm about to ruin it for you. I call it the Sixth Sense effect in my house. I'm actually dead. I just don't know it yet. And that's why no one ever looks at me when I talk. I don't know if there are other people in the room that have this, but for me, it's a real thing. And I've always known it's a thing. Like when I'm talking to Andy, God bless you. And he's on his phone. I'm like, Andy, are you listening to me? Yes, I'm listening. And I've always known it's a thing. However, then we got kids. And my kids have many gifts. They're very clever. They're wonderful. Listening is not their superpower. And I find myself suddenly in this situation where I realize that I need to manage that space between my expectation and my experience of my children. And I need to go, do you know what? This isn't all their stuff. This is me. I need to get my head around this, and I need to begin to manage some of this. You know, I need them to listen because I need to feel like I've been heard. But that isn't all on them. And so what happens when what I need doesn't match who you are? And what happens when you can't meet my expectations? That's a tough thing. But I find the Bible really helpful in this stuff. In Galatians, it says this: each one should test their own actions, and then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. You know, when I find that I'm getting frustrated and irate and full of whatever because somebody isn't meeting my expectations, I have to ask myself, okay, like quite honestly here, what's mine, what's theirs, and what's reasonable? And they're really important things to ask. Because as we work this out, we realize I can't manage the outcome, but I can recognize my need and manage my expectations. And actually, that's how I win. And what I'm not saying, and I need to be very clear on this, I'm not saying, right, we'll write people off, treat them like the Monopoly game and just opt out. What I'm not saying is that. And I'm not saying that people can't change and we shouldn't give people second chances. But this is an important thing. Giving someone the chance to change and taking offense because they don't are two very different things. Christmas has always been a time of expectation. Like the two things go hand in hand. They can't help not. But often, Christmas isn't about, and we know this, but Christmas isn't about getting what we need from a season or getting what we need from people. But actually, it's recognizing what we really need. And in a sense, it always has been. If we go back to that first Christmas, there have been 700 years of waiting for freedom for the nation of Israel, for this person, this figure that would come. And people expected so much. They expected a politician who would maneuver the country into freedom. They expected a warrior who would fight for freedom for the Jewish people. They expected an activist who would force freedom into being. But what they needed was a baby, completely full of sacrificial love. In Luke 2, we continue, and it says, "And she, Mary, gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, 'Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger.'" I want to talk to you in my last couple of moments about the shepherds. You see, I'm sure the shepherds will have been aware of the rumors of a politician or a warrior or an activist waiting for this moment of freedom. But all of a sudden, this happens. Angels appear. The Messiah's here. There's an invitation to go and see him, and I wonder what they expect to find. I wonder what they expect in that moment. Forgive me if you've heard me talk about this before and talk about it recently, but the shepherds were in a field just outside of Bethlehem. And the name Bethlehem, it has two names. In Hebrew, it means house of bread. And the reason for that is that the fields all around Bethlehem were covered in wheat. And where there's wheat, there are animals who eat the wheat. And so in Arabic, Bethlehem is known as the house of meat. So house of bread, house of meat, because it was surrounded by sheep. But these weren't just any sheep. These were really special sheep. These were sheep that were used for the temple in Jerusalem, and these were sacrificial sheep. So what would happen every so often is that the shepherds would lead these sheep and these lambs to Jerusalem, to the temple, and they would be sacrificed there. And what that means is that it was a kind of act where symbolically the sheep represented every choice that the Jewish people made, where they put themselves in the place of God in their lives. And at 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a sheep would be sacrificed, and it would put the people right with God. And so these sheep were really significant. It was really important that they were perfect, completely perfect. And so when these little lammies were born in Bethlehem, I realise I'm in a stance, that you'll understand this in a minute. When they're born, and they come out of the sheep, what would happen is they would take the sheep, and those needed those sheep to not get hurt in their enthusiasm at being born. They needed their legs to all be in one piece. So what they would do is take these lambs, and they would wrap them in cloth, and they would place them in a manger. And so I don't know what those shepherds expected to see. I don't know what their expectation was as they approached the Messiah. But when they experienced Jesus, when they drew next to him, there was no doubt about what they saw. A baby just born, wrapped in swaddling cloths and placed in a manger, prepared and ready for the greatest act of sacrificial love that humanity has ever seen. And that act in itself would bring freedom. 33 years later, Jesus grows into a man, and he goes into Jerusalem. And he walks in through one gate during Passover, which was a festival, while at the same time, all of these sheep are ushered in, ready for sacrifice through another gate in the city. And in the following days, Jesus was crucified. He died. And he took on that role of that lamb for every moment and every time that we would choose to put ourselves in the place of God in our lives. And Jesus died on a cross at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the exact time that the final sacrifice in the temple would be made. I don't know what your expectation of God is this Christmas. I don't know what your expectations of God have been. I don't know whether he's met them. But if I'm really honest, my hope for you this Christmas isn't about your expectation of God, but about your experience of him. You see, the invitation to the shepherds was to leave your expectation for a moment, get close, and have an experience. And in these coming weeks, there's plenty of opportunity for that. We've got the Carol concert next Sunday. We've got Christmas Day services. If you're not in the area and you watch online and you want to get to a church in person, do it. Come here. We'd love to see you. But what if you changed your expectation to an experience? For those of you who have maybe seen many Christmases, and this is your many sort of Christmas experience in church up in Vast, what would it look like to have a new experience this Christmas? Of a God who maybe not gift you what you want. He is not necessarily a God who will always give you what you want, but he is always a God that you need, and exactly what you need. The band are going to come back on, and I'm going to pray. And these guys are just going to sing over us for a while. And I wonder, as we sit here and reflect, we could maybe ask God ourselves, even possibly for the first time, God, where am I expecting things right now where you just want an experience with me? Asking God even now for that experience of who he is and how far he would go for a relationship with you. And what that might mean to us. So God, I thank you that you are a God who never changes. I thank you that just as where we started this today, you are a God that can be trusted. God, where we have expectations in this season of ourselves, of other people, even of you, God, as we draw close to you, we draw close to that baby born in a manger, would our experience transform our expectation? God, would you not give us what we want, but instead, God, would you show us that you are exactly the God that we need? Amen.